What's the most F-up shit you've walked into? Story 1. A friend got really drunk at a party and was put to bed to sleep it off. Many of us stayed there to avoid driving under the influence. Later, when I got up to use the bathroom, I found the aforementioned friend sitting on the toilet with the lid down. He had his hand on his privates and was sitting in a puddle of vomit. At some point during the night, he tried to relieve himself but ended up passing out. He earned the unfortunate nickname Mishap Mike after that incident. Story 2. I was with my friend during our first year of college. We were roommates and he happened to be 21. We were walking to a liquor store to buy some alcohol. Just as we got across the street and about 40 feet from the store, a car ran over two people. One person was thrown into the air while the other was knocked to the side, accompanied by horrible sounds that I hope to never hear again. People rushed over to help as we stood in shock. With so many people already trying to assist, we continued to the store, got the alcohol, and then came back outside to see two sets of paramedics attempting CPR. People were screaming, and I could tell by the paramedics' body language that one of the victims had died. I'm unsure about the other, but I suspect they shared the same fate. We went back inside for more alcohol, but the memory of that night never left me. Story 3. This summer, I was leaving work in a rural area in NY. I got to the main highway, let a motorcycle pass, turned, and started driving behind it. The rider was speeding. Anyone who lives in rural NY can probably guess what happened next. I saw a deer sprinting across a field ahead of us. Surely the man on the motorcycle saw the deer. Hopefully the deer heard the motorcycle. Unfortunately, neither did. The deer ran into the road, the man wiped out, and the deer miraculously leaped over the skidding bike and ran off. I stopped my car and ran towards the man while dialing 911. There was a layer of what appeared to be his skin spread across the road. He was screaming for help to lift the bike off him. Other cars stopped, and we managed to pull the bike off him while I tried to get an ambulance. His hand was severely injured, and his foot was pinned under the bike, exposing the bone. His helmet came off, revealing that he was likely close to 80 years old. He was chewing on a toothpick, which pierced through his lip. We used a belt to try to stop the bleeding. The ambulance arrived, took him, and I never found out what happened to him. He was wearing jeans, a leather jacket, no gloves, and loafers. The bloody skid mark left by his accident stayed visible for days until it rained and washed away. Story 4. This happened to someone I know in a different hospital. The hospital had a relatively small ICU, with around 6 to 10 beds. A patient was admitted to the ICU for an out-of-control infection after swimming in a lake, about a week after being discharged from a previous hospital stay for severe burns covering his entire lower body. Swimming in unclean water with such injuries is a recipe for disaster. He was diagnosed with a severe infection and had recently undergone a surgical procedure to remove damaged tissue. The nurses and patients in the ICU often complained about the strong odor coming from his room. Despite his condition, he was quite pleasant, but his girlfriend was frustratingly loud and constantly harassed the medical staff. A physical therapist assistant walked into the patient's room one day and was not paying attention to any noise behind the door. He pulled back the curtain to see the girlfriend engaged in intimate activities with the patient. The dressings on the patient's lower body were removed and heavily soaked with blood. The assistant was hit by the smell first, but was shocked by the scene before him. The patient sadly passed away a week later due to complications related to the infection. The assistant still remembers that moment whenever he enters that ICU room. Story 5. I was a resident assistant, RA, at a major university in Canada. One day, a girl came to me because she was locked out of her room and couldn't reach her roommate. This wasn't unusual in our building. I went with another RA, knocked twice, and heard no response. When we opened the door, we saw her roommate and 3 guys engaged in intimate activities. She pulled away and said, "Sorry, I was a bit occupied." I quickly shut the door and found an empty room for the shocked student, who was a devout Catholic, as she'd often mentioned. We walked silently to the other room. Story 6. Back in college, I had a few friends in a sorority, and we would attend parties on the weekends. One time we walked into a frat party, and right in the entryway, a girl with her pants around her knees was trying to run down the stairs, but tripped and fell halfway down. We rushed over to check if she was okay, and 3 guys appeared at the top of the stairs, insisting that she was with them and fine. The girl, however, was completely disoriented. She didn't know where she was and couldn't even tell us her name. My friends and I decided to get her home. We pulled her pants back up and I carried her out while ignoring the protests of the guys. In the car, she couldn't tell us her address, didn't have her phone, and couldn't recall any phone numbers. Thankfully, she had her ID, which helped us locate her apartment, where we left her with her roommate. Story 7. Years ago, I was backpacking through Europe with 3 buddies, and this particular incident happened in Amsterdam. One of our friends had been sick for most of the trip, missing our Prague stint and all of Berlin, about 10 days. In Amsterdam, he was finally feeling better, so he joined us on one of those touristy pub crawls on his first night out since getting sick. Long story short, he got extremely drunk and was all over the place. As we moved to a different bar, we lost track of him around 10 p.m. We figured he either went home or would catch up with us, but we were too drunk ourselves to worry. By 4 a.m., we were walking back to our hostel without any sign of him. We hoped he had made it back safely. When we opened the door to our room, there he was, curled up in his boxers on the floor. Our initial relief quickly turned to horror as we realized the entire room was covered in excrement. It was everywhere, on the beds, walls, and all over him. It was like a scene from a gross-out comedy. There was also vomit all over the bathroom. To top it off, his clothes were neatly folded at the end of his bed. He had no memory of what happened that night, but the sight and smell stuck with me for years. Story 8. As a paramedic, I once walked into a small apartment where 4 people had overdosed. A large woman was lying on top of a smaller man, and both were in cardiac arrest with severe cyanosis. There was a woman on the couch entering a respiratory arrest, and a man slumped against a chair in a similar state. In the end, the woman on the couch and the man in the chair survived. The others didn't make it. From what we could gather, they had all used a contaminated batch of heroin. The 2 who didn't survive had apparently begun a physical encounter before going into respiratory and then cardiac arrest. The man in the chair was the one who managed to call 911. If he hadn't, they likely all would have died. It was the worst overdose scene I've encountered. Story 9. I used to work in a female prison in the UK as a male officer. One night during lockdown, I was trying to get everyone back to their cells, mostly by shouting ineffectively, but eventually they all complied. I walked into one cell to check and found 2 women attempting something shocking. They were trying to insert a large plastic bottle into one of the women. I left immediately, feeling it was best not to intervene at that moment. When I returned 5 minutes later, everyone was back in their respective cells, and the woman involved was sitting calmly watching TV. I never reported it, but I did tell my wife about it when I got home, and she simply remarked that it wasn't much of a surprise, considering what the human body can handle. Story 10. When I was about 11 or 12, I went outside to play and quickly found a disturbing sight, a trail of dead puppies left by my pregnant Rottweiler in the yard. I vividly remember that one was missing its head. I followed the trail into the detached garage, where I found her eating them. We managed to save 3 puppies from her first litter, as she clearly did not want them. We had to take over their care, but the memory of that day still makes my stomach turn. Story 11. I'm a caregiver, and my last job involved taking care of developmentally disabled, DD adults. One of my clients was a middle-aged woman with a genetic condition known as Prader-Willi syndrome, which causes constant hunger. Food was always on her mind, and she would go to great lengths to get something to eat. She had an intellectual disability, but her IQ was close to average, allowing her to lead a fulfilling life. The main care she required was supervision. Food had to be locked up, and we couldn't throw food away unless it was flushed down the toilet or placed in a secure trash can. When we went out in public, we also had to check bathrooms and trash cans for food. One day, while out in the community, my client needed to use the restroom. I waited, but it was taking a long time. When I entered to check, I found her with her hands and face covered in feces. She was attempting to eat it. I composed myself as best as I could and calmly instructed her to finish up and wash her hands and mouth thoroughly with plenty of soap and water. Story 12. My best friend invited me to an adult party saying we should come by. I knew that he and his wife dabbled in an unconventional lifestyle, but I didn't think much of it. My girlfriend and I grabbed a bottle of booze and headed over. When we walked in, we were met with a shocking scene. My friend's wife was involved in a very personal moment with someone on their couch and casually greeted us without stopping. We walked in and my friend came rushing down the stairs, fastening his pants, followed by a half-dressed woman. I greeted him and made my way to the kitchen. In the kitchen, there was a man dressed in fishnet clothing with a woman attending to him. It was like something out of a bizarre movie. My girlfriend and I sipped our drinks and chatted with people for about an hour, before we decided to leave. The whole experience was wild. Story 13. When I was young, I was at my grandparents' ranch. My grandmother asked me to help my grandfather, who had been assisting a cow giving birth for a while. I walked out to the silent barn and saw my grandfather looking down in either disgust or sadness. When I got closer, I saw the most disturbing sight. The calf had already died inside the mother and had ruptured during the birthing process, causing shock and a severe prolapse for the cow. There was a lot of blood, a smell I'll never forget, and the decaying remains of an unborn calf. Story 14. My youngest brother was into cosplay and was pretty good at making costumes. But there was one particular costume he became obsessed with, a villain from an obscure video game. He practically lived in it, complete with makeup. If he wasn't fully dressed, he'd wear a white bodysuit and the headpiece, which made for a terrifying sight. One night, as I pulled into our driveway at the end of a wooded lot, I saw him standing there in the dark, wearing the filthy costume that he never washed. It was an eerie sight. I'm not sure what he was doing, but it seemed off. He even showed up to Easter dinner in that costume once. I suspect there was some deeper reason behind his attachment to it. Story 15. When I was in college in Texas, I lived in an apartment-style dorm with 2 bedrooms on each side, sharing a bathroom, living room, and kitchen. One day, a friend and I came back from a canceled class, only to walk in on my roommate in a compromising position on the couch, watching an old VHS movie. To make matters stranger, he was wearing a cowboy hat, cowboy boots, and had his leg lifted in a very awkward position, reaching between his legs. He was also close to 300 pounds. Needless to say, I never sat on that couch again and switched rooms at the end of the semester. Story 16. I was delivering a parcel to a business in a remote area when I walked in on a bizarre scene. A naked woman was tossing cucumbers at an elderly man who was bent over. She saw me, asked me to wait for a moment, and then proceeded to throw a few more cucumbers, seemingly aiming at a rather awkward target. Once finished, she came over, signed for the parcel, and started picking up the cucumbers. The elderly man shouted a cheerful "thanks" as I left. There must have been around 30 cucumbers scattered on the floor. Later that day, I delivered another package to a man who was being arrested. The police allowed him to sign for it, and he joked that it was an adult toy meant for the officer's spouse. The officer warned him to keep quiet with a stern retort. It was quite the eventful day, and I still remember that elderly man fondly. Story 17. When I was 18, I worked as the spot kid at a car dealership, moving cars around the lot. Whenever a salesman sold a car, it was called a spot, and I'd be responsible for cleaning it. I also cleaned up trade-ins and other vehicles when I had the chance. One day we received a large conversion van as a trade-in. It sat in the back lot for a while. As I kept putting off cleaning it due to its size, it would take hours. Finally, I decided to get it done, grabbed the keys, and headed to the back of the lot. When I opened the door, I found 2 male salesmen engaged in a private moment on the pull-out bed, while the female sales manager watched from one of the captain's chairs. There was also evidence of heavy drug use. I quietly closed the door and slowly backed away. I never cleaned that van. When the service manager later asked why, I told him that Jan, the female manager, had told me not to bother and to ask her about it. A few days later, the van was sent to auction. Nothing was mentioned about what I saw, but things felt awkward in the sales office for a while, until the events of 9/11s happened, which shifted everyone's focus. Story 18. My wife and I went to a Denny's for a late breakfast. In the booth behind us, separated by a partition, was a couple with their teenage daughter, who looked to be about 16 or 17. The mother was sobbing, visibly upset, while the father was angrily scolding the daughter. We overheard that the daughter had been picked up by the police in the middle of the night while driving a stolen car with 4 of her friends. The parents had just bailed her out of detention, and the father was giving her a stern, "We did not raise you to behave this way" speech. Apparently, she had been sneaking out to party at night with her friends. Things escalated quickly when the daughter admitted that she and her friends had been engaging in risky behaviors to obtain drugs and alcohol each night. The stolen car belonged to someone she had encountered during these outings. The parents had thought their daughter and her friends were simply joyriding in a stolen vehicle, but the reality was much worse. Story 19. When I was 12, I volunteered at the library in the kids section. If kids wanted a copy of something, they had to ask me, and I would charge it to their library card. I went to make a copy of a picture in Horton Hears a Who, definitely so the kid could color it. I walked into the back and saw a cop with a guy bent over the table in handcuffs, tossing out bags of what looked like green spices and sugar, along with wads of money. I said I needed to use the copier, and he said that was fine. So I stood right next to them while he finished emptying the guy's pockets, and I copied a picture of a Dr. Seuss elephant. I returned to give the copies to the kid, who was about 8 or 9. I explained why it took so long, saying a cop was searching someone in the back. I described the strange items I'd seen, and the kid deadpanned, "That's weed and cocaine, my dad does them." Story 20. Back when I was an RA at my university, I walked in on a guy trying to take advantage of a girl. She was incoherent, unable to stand, and her eyes were unfocused. He claimed he would take care of her as a close friend, but when I asked him her name, he couldn't answer. My coworker and I escorted him out of the dorms and noted his information, but it was only my second late-night shift. I was just 19, and my training hadn't prepared me for something like this. If I'd known then what I know now, I would have done more. The student wasn't drugged, but was blackout drunk. A neighbor saw her being carried by a stranger and called us, knowing her roommates were away for the weekend. When we arrived, we were already patrolling nearby. Both were fully clothed, though her clothes were disheveled. The guy claimed to be a friend and said it was her first time drinking. We gave the girl water until she became coherent enough to admit she didn't know the guy. We took down his information, but Campus PD said there wasn't enough proof of intent or physical contact for charges. The girl didn't press charges, fearing her parents would pull her out of school. She also had unclear memories of the event and just wanted to forget it. We filed a report, but that was all. Story 21. In the late 90s, there was an after-hours bar I used to visit in Philly. Being a bartender, it was a good spot to grab a drink after work. It was run by the mob, so you had to know someone to get in. It was a lesbian bar until midnight. Then they'd close and reopen at 2 a.m. One night, I got cut from work early and decided to head over. It was around 1 a.m. The bouncer knew my uncle, so he let me go upstairs for a drink, even though they weren't open yet. I walked upstairs, and as I turned the corner, I saw the bartender behind the bar. On the other side of the bar, there was a guy chained to a chair. 2 mob guys I knew were roughing him up for reasons unknown. There was blood everywhere. The bartender asked if I wanted a drink. I said, "Nah, you know what? I'll come back after you guys open up." And I left, turning around like Grandpa Simpson. Story 22. I was apartment hunting in an urban part of NJ and found a great deal on a 3BR2BA in a rough neighborhood. I went to see it with my buddy and immediately thought, no way I'd survive here. But my buddy said, "The owners drove up from Philly, so let's just see it through." Fine. They casually mentioned tasks to reduce rent, like mowing the lawn or shoveling snow. At that point, my buddy mentioned I was a med student. Now I'm a resident. And the owner said, "Oh, the lady downstairs is sick. We could lower rent if you take care of her." I declined and said I was leaving. But wait, we had to see the backyard. The second owner stayed upstairs while we were shown a ditch with rusty metal and a tire. The owner then got a call from his wife, saying the neighbor felt unwell and asked, "Would you go check on her?" Being foolish, I agreed, but stated I could only call an ambulance if needed. Upstairs, I found a dead body and a hysterical woman. The woman hadn't heard from the neighbor for days, found her unconscious, and called 911. The lady was in full rigor mortis. There was nothing to be done. I took the phone and told 911 that CPR was futile. I spent the next hour consoling this stranger while the owners kept asking, "Are you sure she's dead? Shouldn't you try CPR? Should we get a blanket?" After things calmed, I told my buddy we were leaving. The owner then said, "Don't get too emotional. I watch people jump off buildings during 9/11s. Story 23. Not me, but a friend. We both worked in a fairly upscale hotel. He worked maintenance and got a call to fix a broken door latch. As he approached the room, a clearly teenage girl stormed out, yelling at her parents, "I'm not watching this again." She let my friend into the room, and then things got weird. The girl's mom and dad were 250 and 300 pounds, respectively. My friend mentioned he was there to fix the door. Both parents were under the covers, which seemed normal. They told my friend to start working, but soon got out of bed completely naked and began an intimate act at the foot of the bed. My friend tried to leave, but the dad yelled at him to keep working as he continued loudly. Shaken, my friend barely managed to finish the repair. On his way out, he glanced back and noticed the dad resting his belly on his wife's back, holding a chocolate milk. Story 24. I was approaching a club when I saw a guy hitting a woman outside. He was punching this 110-pound girl, and he was big. I tried to intervene, but he punched me, giving me a black eye. He then charged at me, but he was drunk and off balance, so I tripped him and pinned him down. I do BJJ and was competitive at the time, so I didn't feel threatened once we were on the ground. After about 30 seconds, the bouncer pulled me off and lectured me like I was the troublemaker, while the guy simply walked away. The woman explained what happened to the bouncer, who finally let me in, but warned me not to start any more trouble. Later, the guy returned to retrieve his phone, and the cops picked him up. Story 25. A few years ago, right after my husband and I got married, we attended his family reunion. My husband is originally from Kenya, and the reunion was at his parents' house in Nairobi. I had only met his parents before, so I was very nervous about meeting the rest of his family. His parents have a large house, so some family members from out of town were staying there, including us. The first night, I couldn't sleep due to the time zone difference, so I got up around 4 a.m. to get a glass of water. I heard something in the living room but didn't think much of it, assuming it was my mother-in-law who has insomnia. I figured I'd chat with her a bit before going back to bed. But when I walked into the living room, I saw my husband's uncle on the couch with his wife in a compromising position. I froze, and so did they. We didn't speak the same language, so it was silent and awkward. I turned around and went back upstairs. We never spoke about it again, but it was definitely the worst way to meet the family. I still can't make eye contact with them during holidays. Story 26. Drunk at a party in a bar with two roommates of mine. A massive queue for the toilet, so I decide to go outside and just pee against some stone wall across the street. I meet a guy there who's been kicked out of the party. He asks if I want to use a normal bathroom. I say yes and follow him to his house, just around the corner, above my usual coffee shop, the kind where you buy weed. This is the Netherlands. I follow him upstairs and use his bathroom. As I walk out, he's standing there with a big kitchen knife saying, "How about I stab you right now?" I'm drunk and don't fully understand, so I respond, "I'd rather you didn't." He puts the knife down and I follow him to the living room where there's a piano. He asks if I play. A bit intimidated by the knife incident, I mumble, "Yes," though I actually can't play. He threatens me again, so I hit some random keys on the piano, horribly. He rolls a joint, asks if I want some, and I sit down on the couch with him to smoke. My friend calls, asking where I am. I explain that I'm above the coffee shop smoking weed. My friend rings the doorbell, gets threatened too, and then joins us on the couch. We get stoned, leave, and never see the guy again. Story 27. All right, here we go. I was at my distant father's house for visitation when I was about 15. It was in a fairly rural area with no neighbors for miles. A large old house from the 1800s. People started showing up and partying in the backyard. My dad's an alcoholic, so I tried to just chill and read. Around midnight, I heard a commotion and looked out the window. The entire group, including my father, was engaging in inappropriate activities in the backyard. An 80-year-old naked guy walked by me inside the house, pouring himself a drink, and said, "Don't go outside, bud." I called my buddy left and came back the next day to hear my dad's awkward apology. It was wild. Story 28. So we're all sitting at the bar in my dad's house. I'm about 17. It's me, my dad, JR, Bruiser's brother Nam, and Dad's girlfriend. Dad's dealer shows up, but he's strung out and being difficult. My dad, despite the stories, is usually a chill guy and tries to reason with him. The dealer isn't intimidating, just a struggling redneck selling decent weed. My dad always cut him extra slack because he felt bad for him, but the dealer kept getting more aggressive, even swinging at my dad. Bad move. My dad, staying calm, eventually grabbed a golf putter from the shed by the pool. Jay panicked and hid behind the bar while my dad struck the dealer across the legs. The dealer, realizing his mistake, started pleading. My dad then called his massive German Rottweiler, who barked at the dealer while my dad's friend held the dog back. The dealer wet himself. My dad crouched next to the dealer and delivered a speech about honesty in business. The dealer, embarrassed and soaked, got in his car and left. We then had a beer together. Story 29. When I was a child, my father was absent from my life for a period of time. At the mentioned house, he apparently used to throw some of the wildest parties. One of them, as I later found out, went like this. Father was having a massive party in the middle of nowhere around 2005. He worked in the adult entertainment industry, so his guests included people from the industry, including Ron Jeremy. People were drinking, doing drugs, and engaging in wild activities as expected at these parties. At some point, a guy named Bruiser suggested ordering pizza and messing with the delivery guy. They picked R, a 30-year-old with a military build, bad teeth, and a deep voice, and decided to dress him up as a woman using costumes from the adult industry. My father described it as two beautiful women trying to fit R into pink panties and a dress. Bruiser looked like a cartoon character mixed with a biker. R was completely transformed, makeup, heels, dress, wig, and all. When the pizza arrived, R, imitating a woman, invited the delivery guy to join the party. The delivery guy, a college student, surprisingly agreed to stay. R kept flirting with him, and eventually, they went to a room alone. Everyone was blackout drunk, but someone suggested checking on them. They found R in a compromising situation with the delivery guy. The group laughed and cheered before returning to the party. The delivery guy left with a $500 tip and some substances. Story 30. I worked as a security guard for a wealthy man who had a serious issue with skaters and homeless people on his property, which was in an area with a significant homeless population. He had enough influence to restrict people from even being on the sidewalk, despite it being legally allowed. Most of my interactions were with homeless individuals. One day I received a call about someone rifling through the trash. I approached him, and he seemed relatively new to homelessness. Over time, we developed a mutual understanding as I kept encountering him. We laughed and respected each other's roles. One day I found him extremely intoxicated and possibly on drugs, with blood covering his face. He had pulled out his front teeth using pliers. About a week later, I was called to an apartment building. They didn't provide any details, just that there was an issue in the fitness center. I entered and found the same man in an inappropriate act with another homeless man. When I turned on the lights, they panicked. One of them ran so fast that he crashed through a sliding glass door, leaving a trail of blood. That was the last time I saw him. Story 31. I worked as a Zamboni driver custodian at a decent-sized arena, taking on various tasks. One summer weekend, our facility was rented out for a club team tournament, which was great for business during the slow season. At these events, about 200 players, plus families, arrived from Friday to Sunday. We had only 15 minutes between games to clean the ice in locker rooms, so the mess built up over the weekend. Hockey players are known to drink, a lot. When they weren't on the ice, they were tailgating in the parking lot. Somehow they managed to play while being moderately to heavily intoxicated. By Sunday night, I prepared for a deep clean of the locker rooms. I entered the first one and was hit by a foul odor. In the showers, someone had clearly left a horrific mess resembling a grotesque painting. It was on the walls, grout, and drains. It was the closest I'd come to saying, I don't get paid enough for this. Unfortunately, the only other employee was my 6-month pregnant manager, so I had to handle it alone. I ended up throwing away my shoes and socks, borrowing gym shorts, and heading home exhausted. Story 32. Not sure if this qualifies, but here goes. I used to be a security guard. I did it for 8 cumulative years. During those years, I saw plenty of strange things. First incident. My first job was as a mall cop. I received an alert to head to the roof. Someone had triggered the roof hatch alarm. I went up and did a walk around, finding a homeless man covered in filth by one of the AC heat exchangers. I called it in, and paramedics dealt with it. Second incident, same mall, called to the top level of the parking garage due to motion sensors being tripped. I found a young couple engaged in a very personal act, cowgirl style, with a towel underneath them. I cleared my throat loudly, and they froze before scrambling into their car. I reported to HQ that it was just raccoons. Third incident, same mall. I was patrolling the back corridors behind the stores, approaching the Cheesecake Factory. I heard rhythmic slapping sounds, and when I turned the corner, 2 employees were in an intimate position. I jokingly said, "Need a hand?" They quickly adjusted their clothes and darted out of sight. Fourth incident, I worked in Manhattan at the old New York Times offices during the demolition. On one floor, I found an old security guard locker room. I noticed a missing couch cushion on the floor, tilted as if something was beneath it. I lifted it and found a massive turd about the thickness of a Coke can. Fifth incident, same site, same floor, in the old employee locker room. The water was shut off. I walked in and was hit by a horrible smell. In a stall, I found a toilet with a pile of waste a foot above the lid. It was both gross and oddly impressive. Story 33. This incident happened while I was managing a gas station. It was a small place with limited space. An older lady came in to buy a soda, but before she could pay, another woman stormed in. clearly upset. Soon her husband entered, and they started shouting at each other. The elderly lady at the counter looked terrified. After a few moments of yelling, filled with harsh language, she paid and quickly left. The shouting continued as I tried to calm them down. The woman then grabbed a commemorative glass mug and swung it at the man's head but missed. The man mostly kept calm and didn't retaliate. I ran to the counter to call the police. As I was on the phone with 911, the woman swung again and hit the man, shattering the mug. The man fell to the floor but wasn't bleeding. The woman, looking shocked, dropped the glass handle, walked to their car, and sat inside. The man remained quiet on the floor until the cops arrived. After an interview, both were taken away, and I was left cleaning up the mess. The next day, their car was gone, so one of them must have been released. I never found out what they were fighting about or what happened afterward. Story 34. I was at a Halloween party in a large brownstone in Brooklyn. It was a multi-family unit shared by several artists. I was only vaguely acquainted with one of the hosts and knew only the friend who brought me. The party was wild, and I ended up very drunk. Somewhere along the line, I lost my friend. As the party was winding down, I realized I didn't want to be the last person there, but I had nowhere to go since I had planned to stay with my friend, who wasn't responding to my texts. I also didn't have a smartphone. It was 2011. Someone mentioned seeing my friend in the coat room, so I began searching each room for it. I opened a door and found the coats, but to my right, two guys were in the middle of a very intimate moment. My friend wasn't one of them, unfortunately. I apologized, grabbed my coat, and tried to leave. The house had a confusing layout, and I was too drunk to navigate it. I kept opening doors and accidentally walking in on the same two guys several times. Each time I apologized, but they were not amused by the third or fourth interruption. Eventually, I stumbled into a room where some people were passing a joint. I explained my situation and they found it hilarious. I ended up chatting with one of the girls, and we ended up having a moment together. The next morning, as I was leaving, I bumped into one of the guys I had repeatedly interrupted. He gave me a look as if to say, "You still haven't figured out how to leave?" Story 35. I was stationed in Hawaii and went to pick up some jungle boots that I had resold, with ripple soles, if you're wondering. I walked into the boot shop, and the guy told me my boots were in the back and asked me to follow him. We walked past shelves full of combat boots and others scattered on the floor. He eventually found my boots, but they hadn't even been started. He offered to do them while I waited, and I agreed. He offered me a beer, which I accepted even though it was only 10 a.m. As he worked on the boots, he started talking about his wife leaving him and missing his kids. He now lived in his shop. I tried to steer the conversation back to the boots, but he kept stopping to make eye contact while cutting off the old soles and buffing them. This slowed down the process. He got the new soles on and cut them to fit, but mentioned it would take a while for the glue to dry. He then disappeared further into the back and returned with a Coca-Cola can and a lighter. He asked if I smoked ice and if I wanted some. I told him the beer was enough. I tried to stay cool since I just wanted my boots, and by then, I was on my third beer after about an hour. He smoked the ice in front of me, and I felt like I was watching a documentary. Here was this middle-aged Asian-American middle-class father and business owner casually smoking meth like it was a cigarette. Finally, he said the glue was set and I could take my boots. I left, never needing to get another pair resold, but I can't say I wouldn't have gone back. It was one of the strangest encounters of my life. Story 36. One day at work, I got a call to repair or replace a malfunctioning hospital bed at a nursing home. Most of these facilities have a locked wing for residents with memory-related medical conditions. After speaking with the receptionist, she led me to the memory care wing and let me in. I was immediately hit by a strong smell of feces. The wing was shaped like a T, and as I walked down the hallway, the smell only got worse. I turned left down a long dead-end hallway toward the room where the stench became unbearable. I reached the door, which was ajar, and seemed to be the source of the smell. After taking a moment to brace myself, I knocked and entered. What I saw made me gag. The bed I was there to fix had a man sleeping in it, covered in his own waste. He wore only a very full diaper that was leaking at the seams, with feces smeared across his legs, back, stomach, and arms. Horrified, I quickly reattached a part that had fallen off the footboard, which only took a few seconds. I almost got sick again as I left the room. I hurried to the nurse's office and told her what I'd walked into, urging her to go there immediately. After she signed off on the repair, I left in a rush, feeling the need to bleach my eyes. Story 37. It was my third day as an electrician. working on a construction site for a new H&M store in Walnut Creek, California. I was always at least 30 minutes early, paranoid about being late and getting fired. One morning, while waiting for the crew to arrive, my stomach rumbled fiercely from the large coffee I had. I made a beeline for the porta potties, knowing they had been cleaned the day before, hoping for a decent-smelling experience. It was around 5:30 a.m., still dark, and in my hurry I didn't check the seat. I sat in something wet and realized, to my horror, that it was feces. Initially confused, I turned on the light attached to my hard hat and saw that the porta potty was covered in foul-smelling dark mess. It was all over my backside and legs. I started gagging but couldn't stop since I still needed to finish my business. I reached for toilet paper, only to find it smeared with more mess. Now my left hand was covered too. With no other choice, I exited the porta potty with my pants down and moved to the next one, which thankfully was clean. I spent nearly an hour cleaning myself up. I arrived late on site, explained my situation to the foreman, who laughed and shook his head. He told me to take the full 8 hours and just go home. Story 38. First one. I used to get calls to my grandpa's house all the time while he was alive to fix random stuff he couldn't handle, like the sump pump in the basement or something in the upstairs loft. One day he called saying his TV was messed up, which was usually a simple fix. I got there and noticed it was just on the wrong input. I pressed the button once, and suddenly the screen was filled with explicit content, playing at full blast. Grandpa was unfazed, just said, "Hey, thanks, bud." I told him, "You know you'll ruin your speakers if you turn it up that loud." Second one, my friends and I witnessed a bad car accident, and we were among the first responders. This guy was speeding around a corner, hit a boulder, went airborne, flipped, and landed upside down against a building. We tried everything to pry open the door or move the car, but even with 12 people, it wouldn't budge due to how it was wedged. We could only see his hand through the wreckage. The fire department and cops took what seemed like forever to arrive, and they did nothing until someone confirmed the power and gas were off in the building. I was shouting at them to do something, but they nearly arrested me. The man died in the car while emergency workers stood around waiting. Third one. I was at a party and everyone was messed up. As it was time for those not staying to leave, I went to find my friend who drove us there. I found him upstairs, pants down, trying to engage with a girl who was completely passed out on Xanax. I laughed at first, then realized the situation. I pulled my friend off her, telling him we were leaving immediately. 2 days later, the girl's friend called, asking if I knew my friend's number and address. I said I'd witnessed everything and would cooperate with the police if needed. She said the girl just wanted his contact information, so I gave it. I stopped hanging out with that guy from that day. Story 39. I work in a casino as a security guard. One night, a high roller wanted an escort to his room, so I went with a female officer. She didn't need to come, but we're friends, and it was slow, so she tagged along. We got the 65-year-old man to his room, and as soon as the door opened, he started wetting his pants while shaking our hands. By the time he got inside, the floor looked like someone had poured a 2-liter of Mountain Dew. My friend went to grab towels and called for cleaning services while I stood guard to prevent anyone from slipping. Suddenly, we heard yelling from inside the room. He was loudly berating his wife. I alerted my friend, and we quickly approached the door to intervene. Before we could knock, the door swung open, revealing the man, fully nude with an erection. He shouted, "Do you mind? I'm having a go at my wife." I asked if he was hitting her, and he said, "Yeah, she loves it." Then his wife appeared, explaining that this was part of their intimate routine. We left, confused but relieved it wasn't a case of domestic abuse. Story 40. When I was a kid, my mom dated bikers. When I was 12, we were living with one of her boyfriends, a cool guy but with issues. One night around 4 a.m., I woke up thirsty and went to the kitchen for water. I found the guy sitting alone in the living room, his face covered in blood. He looked at me, smiled, and said, "The best thing about beating yourself up is that once you knock yourself out, you can't do more damage." Then he punched himself in the face until he was unconscious. I didn't know what to do, so I covered him with a blanket, got my water, and went back to bed. I told my mom the next day, and she said she knew. Apparently, he did this sometimes. A few months later, they were arguing in the driveway, and he grabbed her arm. Without thinking, I grabbed a baseball bat to defend her, but by the time I got outside, she had already knocked him down and was stomping on him, shouting, "That's the last time you grab me like that!" I had to pull her off him, Or she might have killed him. That was our last night staying with him. Story 41. In college, my buddy and I traveled from Michigan to Toronto to meet up with some girls. We ended up going to a rave where the girls wanted to score some E. They asked us to drive them to their dealer's house, saying he was laid back and it would be fine. We arrived at a college apartment in a typical neighborhood. A normal-looking college kid answered the door and let us in. Inside, we found a scene straight out of a movie. Bags of ecstasy, bricks of weed, mushrooms, white powder, and a cash box filled with counterfeit bills. There was no security, no dogs, guards, or barred windows. The guy acted like a regular student, offering the girls pills and even trying to sell us fake Canadian $100 bills for $10 each. As we left, my buddy and I were shocked. The girls admitted that one of them regularly traded favors for drugs with him. The dealer was connected to the Russian mafia and supplied drugs to the rave scene. A year later, my buddy started working with him to move drugs into the U.S. Another year later, he was arrested for conspiracy and trafficking. He faced heavier charges, but the key witness died before testifying, rumored to be arranged by the Russian mafia. It was a wild introduction to the drug world. Story 42. My partner and I were called to the scene of an overdose in a very rough part of town. It was so rough that it's considered a delta zone, meaning EMS and fire always need sheriff escorts. We arrived on scene with 2 sheriff deputies. We entered a 2-bedroom apartment and found 5 people sprawled across the floor and couches in the living room. The deputies began checking the rest of the house, while my partner and I started assessing the people there. The first person I approached was a woman, approximately 300 pounds, completely unclothed, lying on top of a man with her chest covering his face and upper body. We rolled her off him and found both were in cardiac arrest with severe central cyanosis. People in cardiac arrest are considered lower priority in triage. Another man on the floor who was clothed had a weak, erratic carotid pulse and depressed breathing, with peripheral cyanosis and constricted pupils, a classic sign of heroin or other opiate overdose. My partner found a woman on the couch who was also alive. I called for the fire department and additional EMS units. The deputies, who were medical first responders, helped us save the living patients. One deputy used a bag valve mask, BVM, to assist the clothed man's breathing while I assessed the 5th person. The 5th patient was a man slumped against a chair, phone in hand. After a sternum rub, he started to respond. He had no cyanosis, a weak but regular pulse, and slightly depressed breathing. He admitted to injecting heroin, so I placed him on a non-rebreather mask with oxygen. Meanwhile, my partner had a deputy assisting with BVM for the woman on the couch, who was in respiratory arrest. We only had 2 oxygen tanks with us, but I'd brought an extra, knowing that we'd taken multiple patients from this apartment before. Hearing fire sirens close by, I asked them to bring in more oxygen tanks and their jump kits. I started drawing up Narcan, an antidote for opioid overdoses, to administer intramuscularly. The man on the floor received the first dose, followed by the woman on the couch. I gave a smaller dose to the man by the chair who was still nodding. As expected, the Narcan began to work quickly. The man on the floor vomited on a deputy while the woman remained unconscious. Firefighters arrived, and I asked them to hook up an oxygen tank to my partner's BVM. I also directed them to start a resuscitation attempt on the 2 people in cardiac arrest, with my partner's assistance. I continued to work on the woman on the couch, administering a 2nd dose of Narcan, and then starting an IV, after multiple attempts due to her collapsed veins. After a 3rd dose of Narcan, she woke up and vomited, a good sign, as conscious vomiting is less dangerous than unconscious vomiting. The 2nd EMS unit arrived with senior paramedics, and I briefed them. They took over care of the woman and the man by the chair, who was now awake and talking. I refocused on the man on the floor, ensuring he remained stable. I gave him a non-rebreather mask and instructed him to take slow, deep breaths, knowing the Narcan could wear off soon. Turning to the 2 people in cardiac arrest, I put the man on a cardiac monitor and started an IV. After establishing the line, I administered epinephrine, dopamine, and sodium bicarbonate according to protocol. The man appeared to have a better chance of survival due to his younger age and lack of track marks, whereas the woman was overweight with multiple track marks. I attempted intubation twice but failed, so I used a combi tube instead. I repeated the resuscitation medications, but after 25 minutes, there was no improvement. I considered an intraosseous IO line for the woman, but decided against it due to her collapsed veins and prolonged CPR. After 10 more minutes, I terminated resuscitation efforts and called the time of death for both patients. The man on the couch was still stable. The next 20 minutes were spent discussing the situation with the sheriffs and awaiting the medical examiner. The firefighters helped gather our equipment, and my partner and I left with the one male patient who was stable. We transported him to the hospital without complications. This call is one I won't soon forget. I'm grateful to the sheriff deputies, firefighters, and medics for their teamwork. Looking back, there are a few things I would have done differently, but I don't think it would have changed the outcomes for the 2 deceased patients. Based on what I observed, I suspect the 5 people injected a tainted batch of heroin, likely mixed with a fentanyl derivative. The 2 naked people seem to have started an intimate act when one or both overdosed, causing the woman to suffocate the man, assuming he wasn't already in respiratory arrest. The man in the corner called 911 and then passed out. If he hadn't called, they all likely would have died. Story 43. My mom once pointed a gun at me when I was 11. She claimed she thought I was my dad, who was abusive and might come back at any moment to kill us. She was hysterical, crying and stumbling, saying my dad might try to hurt us again, and that only she could protect us because the police would side with him, calling him a manipulative person. It turns out none of that was true. She just wanted to demonize my dad to make me too scared to be around him, purely to hurt him. She manipulated me into hating him to prevent joint custody. I didn't realize it was all a lie until about 10 years later, but by then, the damage was done. My relationship with my dad was beyond repair. He had fallen apart and was no longer the same person. Story 44. During my senior year of high school, my girlfriend and I were so close that we could walk into each other's houses without anyone questioning it. Well, that backfired for me, big time. One day, she left one of her sweaters at my place, so I decided to return it. I thought she wasn't home since she mentioned going out with her family. I figured it was a good time to drop it off since her brother was home. As I reached her room, I heard slight noises behind the closed door, which seemed odd since she wasn't supposed to be there. I opened the door, and what I saw was gut-wrenching. She was on her bed with another guy, making out with him, both partially undressed. She looked up and saw me, and it was the weirdest, most heartbreaking feeling ever. I put her sweater down and walked out immediately. She tried to follow and explain, but I was so overwhelmed that I almost fainted when I got outside. We had been together for nearly all of high school, with no signs of issues, so witnessing her betrayal was unbelievable. That happened in 2016, and unfortunately, I haven't been able to find another relationship since. I've met great people in the years since, and I'm mostly over it, but there's always that lingering fear of how quickly everything can change. Story 45. One night I was driving home late, around 1:30 to 2 a.m. I needed to make a right turn at an intersection, but a car was blocking the lane, so I cut through the gas station on the corner. As I drove through the lit overhang and approached the exit, I noticed a guy in a red shirt and white shorts walking toward my path. He wasn't on a sidewalk, just moving through a dark part of the gas station. I sensed something was off. Maybe it was the way he was walking, so I slowed down, stopped, and got out of the car to ask if he needed help. It was dark, and he continued walking toward the street I had turned from. I kept my distance and asked again if he was okay. His response was incoherent, but I could tell something was very wrong. When he reached the light under the gas station canopy, I got a clearer look. He was wearing a white shirt and shorts, both soaked in blood. His face had a tear from the middle of his forehead to his lower jaw, and the left side was ripped and lifted off his skull. He also had an empty eye socket where his left eye should have been. Despite his injuries, he kept walking. I urged him to sit down, but he insisted he was fine. When it became clear he intended to walk into the street, I ran ahead and waved my arms to alert oncoming cars. As he reached the street, a police car arrived. The man made it 3/4 of the way across before a cop convinced him to sit down on the median. Once seated, he began to cry. Later, I learned he had been driving a truck, lost control, crossed a median, went down an embankment, and crashed into a tree in front of a Walgreens. He had managed to walk about 1/10 of a mile from his vehicle before I found him. For weeks, his face was all I saw when I closed my eyes. I never found out what happened to him and didn't want to, as I couldn't imagine someone surviving such injuries. Story 46. I was at a teenage drinking party at my brother's apartment. After drinking for a while, some of us decided to go to the pool area and sit in the hot tub. After a few minutes, we realized no one brought cigarettes, so my friend Chris offered to go get them. The pool doors were unlocked, so we all came in that way, but he must have forgotten or thought it was shorter to jump the wrought iron fence around the pool. Right after he left, I decided to get my weed from the apartment to roll a joint. As I walked in, I noticed a trail of blood. The place looked like a crime scene, with people scattering everywhere. I followed the trail into the bathroom and found Chris sitting on the toilet, pale and covered in blood. My brother's girlfriend saved his life by pressing her finger into a hole in his neck. He had slipped while climbing the fence, and a spike at the top had punctured his neck and nicked an artery. It's surprising how quickly the sight of something so traumatic can sober you up. Story 47. It's a toss-up. After my parents divorced, we moved with my mom to a different state. She quickly got involved with a bad boyfriend, perhaps out of loneliness or feeling a need for protection. I was about 7. My sister was younger, and my brother was older. We were in another room when we heard loud banging and shouting. We rushed in and found the boyfriend on top of my mom with a knife at her throat, threatening to kill her. I was in a daze until my mom yelled for us to call the police, which we did. I'm not sure if he went to jail that night, as my mom likely downplayed the incident, calling it just an argument. Years later, when I was 19, the same man still lived with us. His behavior was somewhat calmer, but still toxic. He wasn't getting along with my sister, and I sensed something would happen. One day, I heard the usual arguments while in the basement. Then I heard a loud crash. I ran upstairs to find the boyfriend strangling my sister. I pulled him off her, and we fought. I restrained myself from doing more harm, leaving him with a dislocated jaw and a bleeding throat. The worst part was the police taking statements while my mom blamed my sister, saying she deserved it. Story 48. I found my boyfriend, my daughter's father, on the bathroom floor after he overdosed. I live upstairs, and when I came home, I heard water running. I was confused since he was supposed to have left for work, so I checked the bathroom. I found him kneeling, face down. I panicked and tried to revive him. I had Narcan, but I was too late. What haunts me most is how slack his face was when I tried to turn him over. My pleas went from wake up to you can't do this to me, to telling him I loved him as I held him, waiting for help. His hands were so cold. The police and EMTs arrived and worked hard to revive him, giving me a small hope that they could save him, but they couldn't. An officer told me, "I'm sorry, he didn't make it. He was my best friend for nearly 10 years, someone I thought would always be there. I took him for granted, assuming our bond was permanent. Now I fear I'll never have that kind of connection again. It's been 8 months since, and I'm still shattered." Story 49. I got so sick with the flu that I nearly died on Christmas Day several years ago. We went to the hospital on Christmas morning, and while we were in the waiting room, a man with 4 teenage young adult kids came in, all looking shaken, especially the dad, who seemed the most distressed. A nurse came out to speak with them, but I couldn't hear what was said. Then they all started breaking down in tears. It was clearly terrible news. Apparently, their mom had attempted to end her life by taking several bottles of painkillers with liquor. The nurse informed them that she was in a coma and the prognosis was grim. The father was allowed back after a few minutes, and the look on his face is something I still remember. He told the kids that the doctor believed she was brain dead, with machines keeping her body alive. More family members began arriving, and one by one they were informed of the devastating news. I watched grandparents, siblings, and relatives arrive at the hospital on Christmas, only to be told their loved one was gone. I came to the hospital thinking I was having the worst day of my life. I had never been so sick. I had been vomiting, suffering from explosive diarrhea, and sweating and shivering through bedsheets for 3 days. When I finally got to see a nurse, she was somber. I described my symptoms, and she nodded, saying a doctor would be in soon. They ran some tests and diagnosed me with the flu and severe dehydration. They hooked me up to IVs in both arms, and it felt like I was being refilled like a waterbed. Between the IV fluids and meds, I finally felt better and was sent home. Story 50. While working as a cocktail waitress at one of the only decent bars in a small college town, the drain behind the ice machine started overflowing. It didn't smell at first, and it wasn't immediately clear that sewage was backing up. At first, it just seemed like normal water wasn't draining from the bar sinks, ice machine, etc. The bar had experienced drainage issues before, so the owner was reluctant to close, especially since it was summer, off-season, and the only patrons were regulars, mostly college professors and local lawyers who mainly made a living defending DUIs in this Texas town known for its prisons. Even 2 of the bar's investors were there, though they typically left day-to-day operations to someone else. The building's owner had come in earlier with a date, noticed the issue, had a drink, and left. He wasn't concerned because his lease was structured to only require him to keep the walls upright and the roof intact. He owned a good chunk of the town's property and had a reputation as a bizarre and selfish landlord. The bar layout included a short hall leading to a back garden patio with a door to the left for equipment like the ice machine. I was ankle-deep in water, wearing flats and a knee-length skirt, trying to mop it up. As the bartender continued serving drinks, the regulars joked about the situation while I was standing in ankle-deep sewage. It became clear that this was not just bar water. It was raw sewage backing up. The bartender joked that I looked like an angry Cinderella. I got a $50 tip from one of the investors that night, but looking back, it wasn't worth it. Story 51. I'll avoid discussing my experiences in the Army, but a few years after I got out, I was bored at work one afternoon and decided to take the rest of the day off. The drive home was semi-rural, a straight shot up the highway for about 15 minutes, passing a gas station, a couple of liquor stores, and a few old motels before reaching my town. Halfway home, I saw a liquor store and motel on one side of the road and a barbershop with a club or hangout on the other side where I was driving. A man had apparently left the liquor store and was standing in the median, waiting to cross toward the barbershop. It was around 12:30 with light traffic. Suddenly, a girl in a white Toyota passed me in the fast lane, driving around 70 miles per hour. I was doing about 60 miles per hour when, out of nowhere, the man in the median stepped directly into her path. I watched in horror as the man's leg from the knee down flew into the air, his shoe coming off. His leg landed on my hood and stayed there as I came to a stop. I ran to the Toyota and found the man, now a crumpled mess, having gone through the windshield and into the back seat. He was making gurgling noises, and with each heartbeat, blood gushed from his face and neck before stopping entirely. The driver, a young woman in her late teens or early 20s, was screaming uncontrollably. Paramedics and police arrived within 5 minutes, taking over the scene quickly. It was, by far, the worst thing I'd seen since leaving the military, a stark reminder of how quickly things can go from normal to horrific. Story 52. I was an MP in the Marines, walking through the barracks with my partner, a female Marine, when we stopped by the duty hut to check in with the barracks duty NCO. The office was empty, so we figured the duty NCO and the assistant DNCO were busy elsewhere. We then entered the day room, a common area with a pool table, TV, couches, and game tables. To our surprise, we found a female Marine in uniform performing an explicit act on another Marine whose PT shorts were around his ankles. Shocked, I blurted out, "What the heck?" They both stood up at attention. The female Marine, a lance corporal, and the assistant DNCO was still wearing her duty belt. The male Marine was in his PT gear, standing at attention with his shorts still down, which made my partner burst into laughter. I told the male Marine to pull up his shorts and leave. Then I sternly scolded the female lance corporal, warning her that such behavior on duty could get her into serious trouble. Although I could have reported the incident to her DNCO or officer of the day, I chose not to. Sometimes it's better to handle things directly rather than rely on the system. I like to think she learned her lesson and avoided repeating such mistakes on duty.